After a race event, the first thing I do is I take my long wand air blower and I blow out the car. I blow out every nook and cranny. I blow out all around the engine, the suspension, down in the A-arms. Everywhere that dirt, grime, or rubber can get, I blow it out. Also, never blow into your air cleaner. If you want to blow your air cleaner out, take it off and then blow it from the inside out. It'd be a lot better on your engine doing that. After giving the car a thorough blowing out, I like to give the car a good wipe down with some material that I made. I use this Palmolive. I just use a few drips in this container full of water. It's a big jug of Palmolive dish soap, and it's like a lifetime supply. Also, when you grab a clean microfiber cloth to clean it out, tear these tags off. These rags are nice and soft, but this tag's like sandpaper. They peel off there real easy, and it's just a lot easier to use that rag without that big ass tag hanging off there. It's off there real easy, and you can toss that in the trash. You don't have to worry about it. When installing your springs, make sure the pigtail for the spring is on the bottom and it's located in that low spot in the A-arm. Every A-arm that is used for a pigtail spring will have that indentation to locate and time the spring correctly. I prefer to use a coarse threaded spring adjuster. This way, when you're making a 1/4 inch change, you can go 1 or 2 turns rather than 5 or 6 on the fine threaded adjusters. Make sure when your spring goes in that it's not sitting on top of that lip there for the collar for the adjuster. If it's hanging up on top of that, it'll bind the spring up and eventually it's going to click in and it may change your adjustments. In any stock suspension type car that I have, I run steel bushings. You can see right there where it's got the steel upper A-arm bushing. The reason for this is the rubber ones that come from the factory are absolute trash. They distort, you lose camber, you lose performance. Even the neoprene ones, they're better, but they still have some distortion. These ones, as long as you keep them greased, will never fail. They're straight, they never bind up. Take good care of them, but it's just the best way to go. Also, I prefer to do my roll center and try to find gains through the front suspension. There's not a lot that you can do with these cars to gain speed, but it would be silly to move forward and not expect to find gains on these suspension points. I try to keep the ball joints as flat as possible. I add a little bit of spacer underneath the back. What will happen is, as this car travels up, that ball joint will run out of travel and bottom out, stopping your travel. Flatten that out. The best way to run a ball joint is when the pin is 90 degrees to the body. When measuring frame heights, make sure you go to the absolute lowest point on the frame. If they run their wheel underneath the car to check your frame height, they're going to hit the lowest spot. Make sure that you mark that spot and you can consistently go back to that same spot every single time. I prefer to use a wedge bolt style sway bar adjuster. I bulleted the end of it so that it rocks nice and smooth and it doesn't change its load. It's coarse thread, it's easy to adjust, and you lock it down with that big ass nut, it ain't going anywhere. It's not going to bend, it's not going to fail. It's a good strong point. A lot of people use the center of this bracket and that pin to designate where they're at on their rear steer. I found that that's extremely inconsistent, so what I prefer to do is I prefer to check the distance between the housing and the frame up on top of the tube where the frame goes up. It's a lot easier to be consistent time and time again by measuring this gap and comparing it to the left side versus going off of that pin. This is always to be checked with the driver in the car. When setting up leaf springs, remember that these are a roll center point. These make up the rear roll center of a car. The lower that point is, the more it changes the roll center. You can play with this and it actually gives you some rear steer. So if the right side leaf spring is in the bottom hole and the tire travels up, it's actually going to travel back more than it would forward. At this angle right here, when the tire travels up, it's actually traveling forward just a little bit. You can change this rear steer with these rear pivots. Same thing with the left rear. If you run that one down, you can get that one to actually travel back a little bit through load, introducing a little bit of rear steer to it. It is a common misconception that more pinion angle increases drive off. What you're actually doing is robbing the engine for horsepower. Keeping that pinion angle down below 2 degrees is the best to maximize your horsepower. If you need drive off, you can work on it with rear steer, rear spring rates, a lot of other things. Setting camber on your hobby stock, on these treaded tires, you need to have, I wouldn't say as much camber as possible, but you need to keep that camber number up. The narrower the tire, the more camber it's going to require. The wider a tire, the less camber it requires. We have a rule of 2 inches of camber on these hobby stocks in the Northwest. So to measure this, you put your square to the bottom of the tire, and the gap at the top of the tire is where you measure. We are allowed 2 inches. Air pressure will affect this. If the tire is really, really low, there will be more tire rollout down here at the bottom, which will make it look like there's more camber. When stringing the right side of the car, make sure you're measuring off of the bottom of the wheel. I see a lot of guys set up their strings and they're measuring in the center of the wheel, but with the camber of the wheel, the bottom is farther out, as well as when you get down in the corner, the tire rollout pivots off the bottom seam of this wheel. This is the farthest out point. This is the point you need to measure. And when you go to the rear, you do the exact same thing to maintain consistency. When I'm stringing the right side of a car, I like to keep the right rear tire outboard of the right front at least 1/4 of an inch up to 1/2 of an inch. This helps the car rotate through the center of the corner and maintains that little bit of freeness. If the right front tire is farther out, the car is going to act far tighter. When you're doing your final setup on your car, make sure you have all the liquids in it. The water's topped off, the fuel's topped off, you have all the gear oil in it, the air in the tires is correct. Make sure you have everything, because the closer you are here, the closer you are going to be when you get on track. When I'm scaling, I have a pile of lead that replicates my driver weight that I could put in on the seat. Rather than having to have a driver climb in and out, it's just easier to do it this way. I do the exact same thing every time. That's how you get good feedback, good notes, and you can make major gains, is you have to record not only the good things that work out, the things that don't work out, so you don't redo those same failures. When getting ready to go through tech, a couple of main things that you've got to make sure you've got is you got to make sure you got the tires all up to the operating pressure. Our high pressure on these is a roughly 28 on the right and 18 on the left. That's what you would roll through tech with as your air pressure. If you run them any lower than that, then you could get dinged on ground height or car height. You can get dinged on a couple other things, camber. So make sure that when you roll through tech, you've got those air pressures up to where they should be. Also, when you roll through tech, make sure that your bar is correct, your sway bar is correct. I do a lot of adjusting with my sway bar, and if I have too much preload in it, it could make it look like the car is too low on my left front frame height. Like I say, to combat that, make sure your air pressures are up, make sure your bar is ready, make sure you set it all on level ground. If you don't have level ground, make sure when you set your bar, you repeat the same process on the same exact spot over and over. If you go from, like on the plate, setting the bar to over on concrete or pavement, the pavement's not going to be as flat as the plate is, so it's going to show a difference in sway bar load. I prefer to run my fuel line through the inside of the car. As long as it's done safely and it's ran through a metal pipe, it will be just fine. I prefer to keep it away from the exhaust, any other heat sources, and you can actually see where this car has burnt the paint on the floorboard from the heat from the exhaust. Imagine running the fuel line anywhere near there. You're going to lose horsepower, you're going to lose performance because you're going to boil that fuel. Run it through the inside, keep it safe, run it through a metal pipe, paint that metal pipe red so in case the emergency workers have to get in here or cut this car apart to get the driver out, they know not to cut through that one. You can also never keep your driver cool enough. In the hot summer days, having some air piped in on your driver is an absolute lifesaver. NASA did a study, and as drivers got hotter or operators got hotter, every 10 degrees they ended up making 50 more mistakes every half hour. It's a lot easier to be consistent, not make mistakes if you keep your driver nice and cool. A lot of hobby stocks cut the nose off, or they run a metal bumper and they don't take the time to keep the nose sealed up and make it efficient. By building the ductwork tight to the nose, taping the edges and keeping it tight, you're maximizing the air that goes in the front and forcing it through the radiator. It's going to cool better, it's going to have more downforce, and overall it's just going to be a lot more efficient. Keeping that valence low, as low as it can get. If you got a 5-inch rule, get it down to 5 inches. will keep all that air up and over the car and not underneath the car. Air under the car creates lift, drag, and it just slows you down. Any good crew chief will tell you proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. Keep that in mind when you're working on your race car. Address every item to make it as fast, as light, and efficient as possible, and you should start seeing some success.